Today's stream will cover the possibility of U.S. and Israeli involvement in a war with Iran, whether such a policy by Donald Trump could spark protests in America, and why Vladimir Putin is once again issuing threats against the United States. I'm Anastasia Norytsyna, and joining me is Yuri Rashkin, public and political activist from the U.S. and a member of the Rock County Assembly in Wisconsin. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Friends, write your questions and comments. Don't forget to put a like on this video and indicate from which country and city you are watching us. We're very interested to know, and we're looking to expand our geography. Donald Trump, according to the Wall Street Journal citing sources, has told his advisors that he has approved plans to attack Iran, but is delaying their implementation in hopes that Tehran will abandon its nuclear program. One possible target of a strike is considered Iran's Ford Enrichment Center, an underground complex under a mountain that is said to be safe from most weapons and could only be destroyed by powerful U.S. bombs. The day before, Trump said his patience was running out. Perhaps the U.S. will intervene in the conflict, perhaps not. He noted that it is not too late to negotiate with Iran. Yuri, why can't Trump make a concrete decision even on the issue of Iran's nuclear weapons? He threatens, he raises tensions, but he does not take any real action. I think that's an excellent formulation, Anastasia. It's hard for me to argue with it. I can only add to it. I received information that Ukrainians are very disappointed in Donald Trump. I decided to talk to the artificial intelligence. What conclusions can be drawn from this? It replied that Ukrainians have had an epiphany, have become a mature political nation, have realized that populism does not work. I said, sounds beautiful, but in essence, people just don't want to be bombed, and Trump is not helping. The answer is yes, he really isn't doing it. Then I ask, what conclusions can be drawn? Perhaps he is incapable of making a decision on Israel. He has constantly had opportunities but has backed down every time. Artificial intelligence has analyzed and said, Trump is not pro-Russian, he's just a coward. He always follows who he thinks is strong and plays along with the strong. If he thinks someone is weak, he's not with them. That, in my opinion, is a pretty accurate description of the current situation. In this case, it's particularly striking how President Trump was hesitant at first, and then he woke up, saw Israel striking Iran on Fox TV, and decided, I want to be a part of this. He wanted to join in, to be a part of it. It seemed to him that his image was not enough. He needed to be part of Israel's actions. Although Israel, despite U.S. support, does a lot of things on its own. Trump was confronted with the fact that he was informed about what was going on. This gave him an excuse to avoid meeting with Xi and Zelensky. While he was not really in control of the situation, everything had already been decided. Israel was planning actions on its own. Trump was faced with the choice of being with Israel or staying out of a big military success. He didn't like that, and then it turned out that this success was not so quick. Iran continues to resist, and Trump, in his usual style, had already prepared everything, even starched his shirt, preparing for a victory parade, in 3 days, regardless of the actual outcome. At this time, his own core of support is starting to crumble because he thought his supporters were following him. He recently stated that he is the one who defines the meaning of the slogan, America First, because it was his idea. Although, in fact, the America First slogan was popular back in the 1930s among those in the U.S. who sympathized with Nazi Germany. Apparently, he either didn't know about it or chose to forget. Now he claims that since it is his invention, he defines what it means. And he has decided that America First is primarily Israel. Many Americans find this suspicious. Though he presented himself as a peacemaker, the U.S. appears to be drawn into war. His actions now seem erratic rather than peace-driven. Meanwhile, an interview with Tucker Carlson is trending on YouTube, promoting Kremlin-aligned views that criticize U.S. intervention. Senator Ted Cruz argues the U.S. must defend Israel as a committed ally. This has deepened a split within the Republican Party, between those backing Israel and those opposing involvement. Those who are against supporting Israel tend not to support Ukraine either, and this is no coincidence. The MAGA wing is a pro-Russian wing that insists that America must withdraw from the foreign policy arena. This is in Putin's interest, and now this wing is pressuring Trump. Although he is not afraid of Tucker Carlson, he has publicly spoken disparagingly of him, calling him a nut job, yet his influence cannot be ignored because he represents the Kremlin's interests. There are rumors that Carlson has lost access to serious circles, but the influence of his rhetoric remains. Against this background, Ted Cruz is perceived as a serious figure, and his position is of keen interest to Americans, perhaps as much as events involving Putin. This is why Carlson is once again in the spotlight amid internal conflicts in the Republican Party. What is Trump doing? He's likely to back down. He may chicken out in front of his electorate, and with every minute that he doesn't order a strike on Iran, public doubts about his ability to take decisive action are growing. In such a situation, it is unclear how such a person can be relied upon at all, considered an ally or a reliable partner. For whom? He will abandon Putin too if he decides that he is weak. This is a manifestation of dangerous predatory adaptability, like a chameleon who pulls out the same deck of cards every time and plays the role of a naive simpleton. This is repeated over and over again. Ukrainians seem to see everything much more clearly, because everything is confirmed or disproved by actions. And Trump has a lot of words. His Twitter is like Tolstoy in volume. But what are all these words about? Nothing. Trump himself admits he doesn't know what he's going to do. Then let him write when he makes up his mind. It is quite possible that Tucker Carlson was not just speaking out against U.S. involvement in the war with Iran, but was trying to indirectly convey signals from the Kremlin to Trump. In Russia, calls to prevent American intervention are growing louder. The Foreign Ministry reiterates that strikes on Iran could lead to uncontrollable consequences, and Ryabkov the day before explicitly warned the U.S. against military involvement. Iran remains Russia's ally, and it is highly disadvantageous for Moscow to see a change of power or destruction of infrastructure in the region. The question arises, how should the American president respond to such a pressure campaign, when even Carlson has already called him crazy? Is he ready to respond as sharply to Putin, or will he once again evade a direct stance? He won't dare call Putin crazy. This is a fight for empty space, for a place in the president's head. On one side is the Kremlin mafia, which reminds Trump that he is theirs. This is Putin's second front, who can no longer help dictators like he used to. He sort of solved the problem after putting troops into Kazakhstan, but has since lost opportunities. Syria ended up in chaos because he got stuck in a situation he thought he was winning, and ended up with no army and no weapons, like a naked king. Now Syria has collapsed, and he can't help Iran either. It's unclear where all the weapons Iran was waiting for went. They even supplied Russia with drones as a show of support, but Russia hasn't lived up to expectations. Not because it doesn't want to, but because it can't. And it's all because of Ukraine. It's amazing how Ukraine has played a key, albeit behind-the-scenes role in weakening all these dark figures that Israel is now tearing down one by one.
Потому что не может помочь, потому что Украина. Это меня просто поражает, насколько Украина здесь играет как бы главную закулисную роль, потому что это то, что ослабило всех этих ужасных игроков, которых теперь Израиль так замечательно стирает с лица земли.
There is not only a moral component linking Israel and Iran, but also a very real military factor that plays a significant role. The Kremlin demands that Trump stop interfering, because Putin can no longer support his allies on the battlefield. So a second front is being launched, the information front, and it is being led by figures like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and other English speakers who broadcast the same ideas as Russian propagandists. They insinuate that America is weak, that it needs to withdraw, focus on itself, and stop foreign engagement. This is one side of the conflict. On the other side is the Israeli team, which is worth separating from personalities like Benjamin Netanyahu. It is his entourage that has invested heavily in Trump and in the Republican Party. They don't care what he does. Fascism, not fascism. The main thing is that he protects their interests. This influences his decisions and rhetoric, forcing him to balance between opposing forces. He's pro-Israel, then get tens of millions from rich donors. He wants to support Israel, but the Kremlin gets in the way. A struggle begins between AIPAC, a powerful lobby of Israeli interests that has invested heavily in Trump and the Republican Party, and the Kremlin, which also considers Trump an asset. AIPAC claims that we bought you, while the Kremlin claims that we own you. Trump vacillates between these forces, trying to pick the right side, while cloaked in talk of protecting the interests of the American taxpayer. The left notices the absurdity of the situation. One says he hates conservative Ted Cruz, another says he can't stand Carlson, but suddenly agrees with Tucker. This causes dissonance, and I explain, you have simply been influenced by Kremlin propaganda. Yuri, how do you understand the true purpose of this war? Officially, Israel says it seeks to destroy Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Unofficially, there are rumors that the goal may be a change of power in Tehran. There is another version. All this is aimed at undermining any attempts to restore diplomatic relations between Washington and Tehran, especially considering that Trump once wanted to establish contact with Ayatollah Khamenei and make agreements. What is your assessment of that? The United States is also trying to understand why the country got involved in this war. What are the objectives? When the Israeli ambassador says on air that Iran is calling America the big Satan, many people respond, this is not the first time this has been said, and it has been going on for years. Why is it causing a reaction now? Democrats and some experts believe that demonstrating U.S. strength is possible. Striking Iran is also possible. But what next? Israel would either have to conduct regular operations to destroy the nuclear program, or a system of inspections would be needed to control the absence of weapons. And current actions are just destruction, without a clear understanding of how it will lead to a strategic goal. Experts see no long-term strategy. All this evokes memories of 2003, when the U.S. invaded Iraq, conducted a quick operation, and then declared, mission accomplished, as if everything had been solved, even though the consequences were much more complicated. After that, the U.S. spent at least a decade fighting guerrillas, Islamist groups, and other radicals, and it did not make the country safer. This argument is being actively used by Tucker Carlson, who is now openly broadcasting the Kremlin's point of view, reminding us that American intervention does not always lead to good results. Here it is important to realize that an information attack is underway to confuse the public. Joe Biden has drawn a clear line. The U.S. stands with democracies against authoritarian regimes, justifying support for Israel and Ukraine. But when U.S. actions appear to meddle in authoritarian conflicts without defending democracy, many Americans feel confused and weary. They struggle to see a clear strategy and question where it's all heading. Even military options, like a strike on Fordow, raise doubts. Is it enough? And how deep does the threat go?
Какой здесь план, что будет дальше, во что мы влезаем, и если мы разбомбим это Фордо, то что, там больше ничего не будет? Сейчас уже говорят, что эта бомба может быть недостаточно глубокой, или Фордо может быть глубже, чем мы думали.
We need to see if this weapon works. What now? Spend a couple weeks testing in Nevada to make sure the bomb works. What is this even about? Trump is looking for a way to look like a winner, without being directly involved in what's going on. His guiding principle: if you are strong or he thinks you are strong, he will support you. If you are weak, he will fear and humiliate you in the process. Friends, write comments, put likes, and indicate from which countries you are watching us. By the way, Yuri, our viewer Oleg Petrov notes that your statement is contradictory. Iran is bad, but at the same time it should not be touched. This is an important question. Everyone agrees that Iran should not have nuclear weapons. The question is different. Is there some new information that requires a strike now, rather than in 2012, when Netanyahu first talked about it, or at any time after that? And besides, the political crisis in Israel is ignored. Netanyahu had a failed Knesset vote, and his coalition could have collapsed.
Не в 2012 году, когда Нетаньяху начал об этом говорить, не за все это время с 2012 года, а именно сейчас. А с другой стороны, игнорирует факт, что у Нетаньяху были ужасные там голосования в Кнессете, у него могло развалиться его коалиция.
Discontent grew as religious Jews threatened to leave the coalition over military conscription. Meanwhile, concerns about Iran's nuclear threat raise the question, when should action be taken? While many support Israel's stance, the key issue is how much the U.S. wants or needs to get involved. If Israel acted assuming U.S. backing, and America stays out, influenced by voices like Tucker Carlson, that plan could fail. Party lines seem irrelevant as decisions unfold independently of Democrats' views.
Но если мы не втянемся, потому что Такер Карлсон, я не говорю здесь про демократов, это не люди, которые имеют в этой администрации вес.
I'm talking about being able to negotiate and still keep the nuclear program deep underground. I wonder if Trump himself has said that Iran is leading him around by the nose, just like Putin. Doesn't he fear that if Iran agrees to diplomacy and agreements, it will follow the same pattern as with Russia? And if Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and the Kremlin unite and tell Trump not to intervene, how will he act then? He would have to back down. I don't see a gap here. Trump doesn't want to get into a war with Iran, and if it can be avoided, he would prefer to do just that. In such cases, he adheres to his usual stance. Trade, not war, as the American media put it.
Да-да, вообще это интересно, потому что Трамп сказал же, что его Иран водит за нос, видимо, так же, как и Путин.
It's interesting how different his reactions are. When Iran leads him around, he's annoyed, and when Putin does it, he seems to like it. If Israel had stayed on the sidelines, as Trump requested, it would have continued to play its game with Iran for a couple more weeks, pretending that it was getting closer to peace and playing the role of a skillful negotiator. But when a strong player comes along and says that we can't wait any longer, that it's time to act, for political or military reasons, and launches an operation, Trump is put on notice. At that point, he splits, because the one who positioned himself as an icebreaker suddenly turns out to be a glacier that melts before everyone's eyes.
Тогда Трампу вот это его ставит перед фактом. И тогда мы видим, как он раскалывается, потому что этот ледокол, он оказался ледником, который тает на глазах.
It's like they're making steam out of him. Maybe it's the same biorobot he accused Biden of being, as if replaced, but in reality it's Trump himself. You start to build conspiracy theories, watching how he can't hold a dialogue, how at the G7 summit he can't even bend over to pick up papers, while Putin is hiding from him in a refrigerator. All this resembles a meeting between a biorobot and a Khadoris, and it looks extremely explosive. Curiously, the day before, Trump said that he had talked to Putin and the latter offered him mediation in negotiations with Iran. But Trump replied, "You better do me a favor, take care of your issues in Russia." He doesn't even mention Ukraine, and by Russia issues he clearly means the war against our country. Although just a few weeks ago, Trump himself was saying that Russia could help. Now we are just trying to guess what his business interests in Russia are, what he is trying to accomplish, because it is obvious that he is once again trying to bring Russian and American business circles closer together.
Ну, да, что говорит Трамп? Сейчас мы пытаемся угадать, какие у него бизнес-проекты в России, о чем он пытается, потому что он явно пытается привлечь Россию и американский бизнес и соединить обратно.
Sanctions have essentially stopped working. All talk about sanctions has become empty, as the existing measures are not being enforced. Moreover, the administration is trying to convince or scare American companies to start doing business with Russia again. In one video, Dmitriev, along with the head of the American Chamber of Commerce in Moscow, states that the US is losing hundreds of billions of dollars and colossal opportunities. Their approach is to bring everyone back to Russia. However, they forget that businesses initially left Russia because of the outbreak of a criminal and immoral war that their customers do not support. These companies are particularly sensitive to reputation. They think not only about profit, but also about environmental impact, because it is important to their customers. Going back to Russia for the sake of money looks ridiculous. They knew from the beginning that they were losing profits, but they left because it was the right decision, and consumers supported them. The current talk about financial losses is just a cover.
А сейчас вот эти все разговоры про деньги это глупости, потому что на самом деле это просто прикрытие.
In the end, they succumb to fear, even though they hide behind greed. The Kremlin is now trying to get Trump's message across. Find your own excuse for why Russia's absence from the G7 is a mistake. He is confusing names, events, dates, claiming that Russia was excluded by Trudeau, when in fact it was Harper, his predecessor. Apparently, Putin is tired of explaining these details to Trump. His mind is a mess, and Putin is trying to internally hook up the right wires to make this mechanism work for Russia again. It's hard to tell if Trump is driven by sympathy for Russia or by fear of Putin, physical or psychological. Against this backdrop, Canada is setting the exact opposite example. They recently announced $2 billion in aid to Ukraine, including for infrastructure rebuilding, and indicated that these funds go toward offsetting their NATO commitments. This is a prime example of how allies can act consistently and transparently while Trump flounders around trying to please everyone.
И они при этом заявляют, что это их как бы затраты в счет их денег, которые они должны платить за НАТО. Так что я думаю, это такое очень прекрасное описание того, что можно делать союзникам, вот помогать Украине в то время как Трамп мечется.
This is important to note. A war in Iran represents a win-win scenario for Putin. If Trump gets involved in the conflict, America becomes weaker and gets bogged down in a regional war, giving the Kremlin new opportunities. If Trump refuses to get involved, he looks like a coward and Putin looks stronger. In any case, Trump, consciously or not, is acting in the Kremlin's interests, because every move he makes benefits Putin. The question is whether Putin himself can become a mediator, or whether it is much more favorable for him to let the US get involved in the conflict and forget about Ukraine. This is one of the most disturbing aspects of what is happening. The war in Ukraine has not disappeared. The shelling has not stopped. Crimes continue, but the world's attention is diverted to new hotspots. This is a characteristic of the news cycle. The attention shifts to the brightest event, and the tragedy in Ukraine gradually fades from the headlines.
Но мы видим, что теперь, когда мир переходит, каждый раз, когда возникает новая военная угроза, мир забывает просто по как бы натуре того, как работают новости, переходит на следующую, самая, значит, яркая вещь, которую мы здесь видим.
This is certainly being used by Putin, and it's hard to say that it wasn't foreseen or wasn't a side effect of the events of October 7, 2023. Since then, for example, Israel shifted its attention away from Ukraine. Such twists and turns are entirely possible, and that is what makes what is happening such a nightmare. The distraction from Ukraine clearly plays into Putin's hands, and it benefits him to keep the war going. Either way, it gives him an advantage. If Trump gets involved in the conflict, America is weakened. If he retreats, he looks like a coward and demonstrates that America cannot be relied upon.
Трамп опять убегает как трус и показывает, что, Америка слаба, что с такой Америкой, как на нее можно полагаться.
I'm just thinking, if it comes to Donald Trump that Putin actually cheated him with this deal, could he get angry? Because then it will be remembered that Russia is cooperating with Iran, maybe helping with air defense or troops, and then he will get angry and start helping Ukraine.
И таким образом, наоборот, разозлиться и помогать, например, Украине.
I think the initiative here depends more on Ukraine, because Trump supports those he considers strong. Ukraine probably needs to demonstrate that strength. We are not talking about getting permission to strike deep into Russia, but rather about building an image that influences perception. For example, vivid footage of Iranian state television burning may have a greater impact on Trump's own perception of the situation. If similar scenes were seen live in Russia during the news, it would also have a serious effect. It is visuals like this, broadcast on Fox News, that can influence Trump more than analytics or reports. He reacts to what he sees on the screen. The footage of burning strategic bombers made an impression on him. At first he liked it a lot, but then he had second thoughts and decided that open support would damage relations with Vladimir Putin. He may express respect for strength, but he is not oblivious to the fear of someone he considers strong. If Ukraine conducted such operations regularly, once a day or once a week, perhaps the situation would change. Today is not the time to care about rules designed for the peacetime. We are not living in peacetime. When, for example, Finland decided to withdraw from the agreement on the ban on mines, it reflects a new reality. The world is now defending itself against the threat posed by Russia, and the recognition of this by other countries is a testament to the role Ukraine has played for 3 years now in deterring Russian aggression, weakening its resources, and showing the world the scale of the threat.
И тот факт, что это признают другие страны, является подтверждением и благодарностью того, что Украина берет на себя сейчас этот удар уже 3 года и забирает силу у России и показывает всем, какая Россия опасная и какая это угроза для всех.
It seems Putin is really trying to get Trump into a war. He had a phone conversation with Xi Jinping today, and according to the Kremlin, the main topic was the war between Israel and Iran. The Russian president said he was ready to mediate. They also discussed the situation in Central Asia and agreed on the need for coordination between Moscow and Beijing in the region. They also touched upon the G7 summit, noting certain contradictions that were manifested there. Every time Putin offers himself as a mediator, or we start discussing such a possibility, we are actually legitimizing him, giving him the status of an important player on the international arena, a link between the parties. But this does not correspond to reality. He is not trusted. People are literally being victimized in the negotiations that Russia is conducting. So I don't see how Moscow can be anything but an aggressor. As Friedrich Merz said when commenting on Trump's absence from the G7, thugs are not invited to the negotiating table. One can only imagine Putin as a mediator in a state of extreme desperation, as an admission of defeat. In the current situation, he is not a mediator. Yes, let me remind those who have forgotten, Putin is the aggressor, and frankly, it's strange to have to remind them of this at all.
Путин не является никаким не посредником в данной ситуации вообще. Да, напомню тем, кто забыл, Путин является агрессором, и я думаю, что никто это не забыл, поэтому как-то даже, наверное, странно это обсуждать в каком-то смысле.
This says a lot about what is going on in their heads. It seems that they simply ignore Ukraine, do not take its position seriously, and act as if they can do without taking its interests into account. That's why Zelensky's presence at the G7 and his joint appearances with allies are so important. Even symbolic gestures carry weight. Meanwhile, Trump avoids being seen with Zelensky, seemingly worried about Putin's reaction. Ukraine could use such images as proof of US backing, potentially straining Trump's ties with Putin, who appears to be in frequent, though carefully distanced, contact with him. The whole situation looks odd and raises questions.
Это испортит отношения, потому что теперь, кажется, Путин звонит Трампу раз в неделю, а может и чаще. Но явно вот боится с ним встретиться, не дает Трампу то, чего он так хочет.
The majority of Americans oppose direct U.S. intervention in the conflict between Israel and Iran. According to a poll conducted for the period from June 13th to June 16th, 60% of respondents do not support the participation of the U.S. Army in this conflict. Only 16% were in favor, and another 24% found it difficult to answer. Yuri, how is Congress reacting to this, and can they change anything there? Can congressmen now rise up and stop Trump? This is an interesting figure because most Americans really aren't interested in sending troops overseas. In many ways, that's why the US has such a powerful military, not to use it, but to deter the threat. We invest in technological weaponry with the expectation that its presence alone will deter adversaries and eliminate the need for manpower. During the Iraq War, the front-page news daily mentioned the names of fallen soldiers, each one by name. It was part of the American tradition to honor everyone who gave their lives. At the same time, the memory of World War II and the generation called the greatest, those who sacrificed for the triumph of good over evil, lives on in the nation's consciousness. This became an important reference point, and for a long time military service was almost a mandatory step for politicians, especially those running for the presidency.
Тем не менее, у нас есть понимание, что была Вторая мировая война, в которой сражалось, как мы называем, the greatest generation, самое великое поколение, которое принесло эту жертву, которое приняло участие в войне добра над злом, в котором добро победило, это важно. И у нас многие десятилетия, если не века, было важно для политиков, которые метили себя в президенты, пройти военную службу.
Even John Kerry was probably the last person to truly demonstrate his willingness to serve. He fought in the Vietnam War, spending 3 months on a patrol boat under fire to show how important military service and leadership are to him. George W. Bush, for all the controversy of his record, at least gave the impression that he was willing to serve. He claimed to have been a pilot in Texas. And now the country is more in the mood to play video games than to reflect on sacrifice. People aren't ready for sacrifice. They want a virtual game to fulfill their expectations, where they have all the weapons they need. It's a very different view of the world that is quickly shattered by reality when real bombs go off. Thankfully, the US has never experienced this on its own soil. We don't want it to happen, and we don't seek to feel involved in the affairs of other countries. It is as if we are protected by beautiful oceans, and against this backdrop, it is worth emphasizing the resolve of President Biden, who declared that support for Ukraine is a matter of U.S. national interest, regardless of the views of individual politicians or a segment of the electorate. He believed that supporting Ukraine was the right thing to do, that people would understand it in time, that history would appreciate it, because it was important to act according to one's conscience. He addressed Americans from the Oval Office in support of Ukraine, despite accusations of inaction and criticism from Democrats, which is inevitable. Meanwhile, Trump is tormented, unable to make a decision. If he brings in the army, he will drag the country into a war in the Middle East, which he has always opposed. He has preferred to retreat and evade. Why not retreat immediately in 24 hours, as he himself said? But in the current situation, he is lost. It is not even clear to whom he should retreat, because fear is paralyzing him on both sides. America is watching this and must endure it, to realize again, service to country matters. As Kennedy said, it's not what the country can do for you that matters, but what you can do for your country. Alas, Trump and his entourage will try to distort this idea. The country is us, serve us. What is missing is honest patriotism, true pride in the country. That's what we need real leaders for. Trump is not one of them.
Вот этого сейчас в Соединенных Штатах явно не хватает. И для этого нужны лидеры, а Трамп это просто не лидер.
If we imagine that the US and Israel win a quick victory over Iran, could that dramatically change Washington's approach to the war in Ukraine? I mean dramatically strengthen the position of those like Graham, who believe that Russia should be pushed as hard as possible, not negotiated with. I think the opposite. If Iran is defeated, it proves, in a way, that if you have enough power, you can succeed. This in turn emphasizes that Putin has no such power. The US now views Russia in the same way that Israel does, as a state that simply seeks to expand its territory. which is perceived as part of their national identity. So the question of how the end of the conflict will affect Ukraine is not so clear-cut. The consequences could be most unexpected. But if it ends too quickly, another dilemma arises. Given what happened in Iraq, it is difficult to accept in the US. Theoretically, one could imagine that Israel already controls the skies over Tehran. If the United States were to intervene, it could step up the strikes even more and establish symbolic control. But a day, 2 days, a week passes and the question arises, what next? This is where the serious problems begin, because the US has no well-thought-out strategy on Iran, only tactical decisions, to give or not to give the bomb. And then what's next? Has anyone thought about that?
И вот тут начинаются большие проблемы, потому что у нас никакой стратегии по поводу Ирана нет вообще. Мы здесь только тактически. Вот здесь дать вам бомбу или не дать бомбу.
Yuri, thank you very much for the interesting conversation and for the explanations of what is happening in the Israeli-Iranian war and its impact on Ukraine. Friends, leave your questions and share your opinions on the topics we discussed. Don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to Yuri Rashkin's channel. Thank you all and see you soon.
Ну и, конечно же, подписывайтесь на наш YouTube-канал и на YouTube-канал Юрия Рашкина. Всем огромное спасибо и до встречи.